Howdy bubs and welcome back. Today we're going to be jumping back into Game Maker and focusing on how to get a score inside our game based off of defeating our enemies and getting points based off of their level, as well as getting set up for having the player die when their health reaches 0. Let's go ahead and jump into our O game. O game is going to be where we store all of the relevant information for how the player is doing in the game, and in our case, the score. Over in our create event for O game, we can go ahead and add in 2 new variables. One is going to be a global variable, and that'll be global.score. The current score at the start of the game is 0. In addition to that, I'm going to have a variable called text scale and initialize this to 1. Text scale is going to be used to determine the size of our text. This will get modified specifically when we hit an enemy and the score increases. Our text size will increase to be greater than 1, so that way the player can see the feedback of the score going up. But how do we actually draw the score? That is going to come into our draw GUI. So let's add a new event here in our O game. It's going to be a draw GUI because we want this relevant to the current screen, not necessarily the size of the entire room. And I'm going to draw score. Let me go ahead and maximize this view. In here, we're going to go ahead and check if our global.score is greater than 0. So I'm only going to display the score if we have at least 1 point. And I'm going to have text scale be equal to the maximum of our current text scale times 0.95, 95%. Or 1, whichever is bigger. This will allow the text size to scale down until it is back to its default state whenever it gets larger right after we get some points. Then we're going to go ahead and set up the details needed for drawing our text. Inside here we're going to have 4 things: draw, set, color, and specify what color we want. In this case I want to do color black. Then we're going to do draw, set, font, and in this case I'm going to have the font we currently are using, F sign. You could of course make another one if you'd like. This is just what I'm going to select for the moment. Draw, set, horizontal alignment, and with this we're going to be aligning to the right. And then draw, set, vertical alignment, and this will be in respect to the top. Then we actually want to draw our text. I'm going to do a draw.text transformed and specify where I want this. I want to get the size of our GUI, display underscore get GUI width, and subtract, let's say, 10 pixels. We'll probably modify these numbers until we're satisfied with where the text appears. And 15 for Y. Then I'm just going to push this to the next line to make it easier to read. And what are we placing here? I'm going to do string casted onto our global.score concatenated to the string score, or points. Maybe all caps. Then I'm going to have text scale. So we know the X scaling for our text scale once again for the Y scaling, and 0 for our angle. Then I'm going to draw set color. I'm going to modify the color to be C white. And we're actually going to copy and paste this and modify it just slightly. It's going to be 2 pixels over and 2 pixels up. This is going to essentially allow us to layer our text, the black and then white on top, to give it a slight shadow and make it easier to read. And now with this, so long as the score is greater than 1, we will display some value. But how do we actually update our score? Right now, it starts at 0, nothing ever changes. That can be modified if we move down into our workspace, over into our enemy, and if we hop into the begin step where the enemy is destroyed, we can go ahead and right before destroying the enemy, we can check if the player is still around, if instance exists player. We'll need this if somehow, this is more future proofing, the player ends up dying but an enemy also dies sometime after, for nothing weird to end up happening. So long as the player is still around, they can claim credit for the score. We can do global.score, and we can increase it by our level. With this, we also want to update our game.textScale and set it equal to 2. So it's going to be twice as large as soon as the player receives some score, and then it'll slowly shrink to 95% every frame until it is back to scale of 1. With this, we should be good to go ahead and give it a try and see how this looks. So in here I can get my weapon, and there we go, we have 2 points. If I can defeat the other enemy, I have 3 points. We saw how it grew slightly. Once I get down here and I defeat the other enemy, and now we've got 6 points. Perhaps I should pick a better font. Those numbers aren't quite as readable. And that's actually all you need for setting up your score. The other part I want to address is getting things set up for our next video on player death. We're actually going to want to update one thing inside our enemy. Inside our enemy's step event, we need to make sure that the sentry does not break if the player is absent. So in our check on if they can see the player, we need to check one other thing. Instance underscore exists player. If the player exists and they can see it, then they go through everything. But if the player doesn't exist, it should never break out of sentry mode or do anything weird. That addresses one thing with it. Our other component needs to be updated inside our player itself. The player is going to handle their untimely demise. We're going to add a new event, and this will be a begin step event. So before a normal step, we're going to determine if alive. We will drag one line of code here, updating the health, over to our begin step, since we will want to make sure the health bar gets updated whenever we die. Then we actually need to address if the player is dead, what happens. If HP is less than or equal to 0, we want to go ahead and make sure we delete our weapon if we have one. So with a weapon instance underscore destroy, if the weapon does exist, it'll destroy it. If it doesn't exist, no problem. Let me go ahead and maximize this. Later on, we'll handle all of the components for actually swapping our player to the player dead. It'll be similar to how we have enemy dead. We'll just have other bits of code involved. And we're going to just have instance underscore destroy, just so we can see the player being removed from the game. And now if we test it out, the player is dead, the health shows it's empty, and the player is now gone from the game. If I had my crossbow and I'm killed, the crossbow is now removed because a weapon now exists. And that's actually all we're going to cover for today's video. This is mostly just to get the score and get the initial code set up for later whenever we actually will have the player death animation being addressed. If you have any questions or need any assistance, just let me know in class. Otherwise, everyone have a good one. I just wanted to say thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Shout out to my bad bubs, my top 5, my day ones. Y'all have always been there for me. Next up, my baby bubs, the next 5. I always love y'all's support. And finally, for everyone else, any little bit helps. Thank you to all my basic bubs for supporting me along my journey. If you want to continue receiving notifications, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell button.